What if I told you that most people aren't actually suffering because of what happens to them, but because of the silent agreement they've made to let the world dictate how they feel? Epictetus, who began life as a slave, understood something most free people still miss today. You are not disturbed by events, opinions, or losses themselves. You are disturbed by your judgment of them. The first Stoic principle is ruthless clarity about control. Some things belong to you. Your thoughts, your choices, your responses. Everything else does not. The moment you stop arguing with reality and stop trying to control what was never yours, your nervous system relaxes, your mind sharpens, and the chaos outside loses its grip. Most people exhaust their entire lives fighting weather, traffic, other people's moods, and outcomes they could never command. The Stoic doesn't fight the storm. They adjust the sails. The second principle cuts even deeper. Your emotions are not facts, they are signals. Anger, jealousy, fear, and sadness feel convincing because they arrive loudly, but Epictetus warned that emotions are impressions knocking at the door of your mind. You don't have to let them in. Most people believe whatever they feel in the moment, and then build their identity around it. Stoicism trains you to pause, interrogate the feeling, and ask, is this useful? Is this true? Is this under my control? That pause, just a few seconds, is where freedom lives. If this perspective is already shifting how you see your reactions, take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who needs steadiness, and subscribe to PsychoVest for more mental armor like this. Another principle that makes you nearly untouchable is voluntary discomfort. Modern life teaches comfort as a goal, but Epictetus taught comfort as a trap. When you only feel okay under perfect conditions, you become fragile. The Stoic deliberately practices small discomforts, silence, restraint, simplicity, so hardship doesn't feel like a personal attack when it arrives. When you know you can endure hunger, boredom, criticism, or uncertainty, fear loses leverage over you. You stop panicking at inconvenience because you've already trained yourself to survive worse in your own mind. Comfort weakens the soul. Preparedness strengthens it. Then there is the principle of indifference to praise and blame. Most people are unconsciously controlled by approval. A compliment lifts them. A criticism ruins their day. Epictetus saw this as another form of slavery. If someone else's opinion can raise or lower your self-worth, you've handed them the keys to your inner life. The Stoic understands that reputation lives outside your control and therefore outside your concern. Do what is right, act with integrity, and let the noise fall where it may. When praise comes, accept it lightly. When blame comes, examine it calmly. Neither should move you off your center. One of the most powerful Stoic ideas is negative visualization, not to create anxiety, but to destroy it. By calmly imagining loss, rejection, failure, or death, you rob these events of their shock value. Most suffering comes from surprise, not pain itself. Epictetus advised rehearsing adversity, so when life tests you, it feels familiar rather than catastrophic. When you've already faced the worst in your mind, reality rarely feels unbearable. Gratitude deepens too, because you stop taking people, health, and stability for granted. You don't cling, you appreciate. Another principle that shields you from emotional turbulence is choosing character over outcomes. Outcomes are uncertain and often unfair. Character is always yours. Stoicism asks a simple question in every situation. What does a good person do here? Not what brings applause, not what feels easiest, but what aligns with discipline, honesty, and courage. When your identity is rooted in character rather than success, failure stops feeling like a verdict on your worth. You can lose money, status, or opportunities without losing yourself. If this kind of inner independence resonates with you, hit like, share this message, and subscribe. PsychoVest exists to build minds that don't break under pressure. Epictetus also taught the principle of restraint in speech. Most people talk themselves into misery, They complain, exaggerate, replay insults, and narrate their own victimhood until it feels real. The Stoic understands that language shapes perception. Speak less about what angers you, and it weakens. Speak less about what you lack, and contentment grows. Silence isn't passivity, it's precision. When you stop verbalizing every thought, you regain authority over your inner world. Another overlooked Stoic principle is accepting human nature as it is, not as you wish it to be. People will lie, disappoint, misunderstand, and act selfishly. Expecting otherwise guarantees frustration. Epictetus didn't teach cynicism, he taught realism. When you accept that flawed behavior is part of the human condition, you stop taking it personally. You respond with boundaries instead of bitterness, clarity instead of rage. This alone removes an enormous amount of daily suffering. The Stoic approach to adversity is also radically empowering. Treat obstacles as training. Every difficulty is material for growth. Insults train patience. Loss trains resilience. Uncertainty trains judgment. Epictetus believed life is a gym for the soul, and hardships are the weights. Most people ask, why is this happening to me? The Stoic asks, what is this teaching me? That shift turns pain into progress and keeps bitterness from taking root. Finally, there is the principle of living as if you are already complete. Chasing validation, security, or future happiness keeps people perpetually dissatisfied. Stoicism teaches that peace is not postponed, it is practiced. You don't need perfect conditions to be steady. You need disciplined thoughts, chosen values, and acceptance of reality as it is. When you stop waiting for life to change before you feel okay, nothing can truly shake you. If you're finding strength in these ideas, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Psychovest, because the more people who master their inner world, the less power chaos has over us all. Most people believe strength comes from control over circumstances, but Epictetus flipped that illusion on its head. He taught that true strength is the ability to remain unchanged by chaos. When something goes wrong, the untrained mind immediately asks, how do I fix this? The Stoic mind asks, how do I respond? That difference sounds subtle, but it determines whether you spiral or stay grounded. Life will always present loss, delay, and disappointment. What determines your peace is not whether these things happen, but whether you let them invade your inner citadel. The Stoic trains the mind to become a place no external force can enter without permission. Another principle that hardens the mind against disturbance is refusing to catastrophize. Most anxiety is not about what is, but about what might be. Epictetus warned that people suffer more in imagination than in reality. A single negative thought multiplies into worst-case scenarios, rehearsed again and again, until the body reacts as if danger is already present. Stoicism teaches you to deal only with what is in front of you, nothing more. Handle the present moment with precision, and you eliminate most unnecessary fear. The future will arrive soon enough. Borrowing suffering from it only drains today. The Stoic also understands that attachment is the hidden source of emotional pain. Attachment to outcomes, people, identities, and expectations creates fear of loss. Epictetus didn't say not to care, he said not to cling. Enjoy what you have fully, but mentally release ownership of it. When something is given back to life, you don't collapse, you adjust. This mindset doesn't make you cold, it makes you resilient. You love deeply without panic because you're no longer trying to freeze reality in place. Another layer of Stoic discipline is self-command, not suppressing emotions, but governing them. The untrained person reacts instantly, words spill out, decisions are made in heat. Regret follows. The Stoic delays response. They let the surge pass before acting. That delay creates power. When you are no longer dragged by impulse, other people lose the ability to provoke you. Insults fall flat, manipulation fails, drama starves. Calm becomes your default, not because life is easy, but because you are disciplined. Epictetus also emphasized that suffering increases when we confuse roles. You are not your job, your relationship status, your income, or your reputation. These are roles you play temporarily. When people mistake the role for the self, every threat to the role feels like a threat to existence. Lose a job and they feel worthless. Lose approval and they feel erased. Stoicism teaches separation. You perform your roles well, but you do not confuse them with who you are. When roles change, and they always do, you remain intact. There is also the principle of selective attention. Your mind cannot focus on everything, so choose wisely. Epictetus warned against constant engagement with gossip, outrage, and trivial concerns. What you repeatedly attend to becomes your inner climate. If you feed your mind chaos, it will feel chaotic. If you feed it clarity, it will stabilize. Stoicism is not about disengaging from life. It's about refusing to drown in noise. Protecting your attention is protecting your peace. Another Stoic insight that keeps you unshaken is recognizing that most people act from ignorance, not malice. This doesn't excuse behavior, but it dissolves hatred. When you understand that others are driven by fear, insecurity, and misunderstanding, resentment weakens. You stop expecting wisdom from the untrained and compassion from the emotionally immature. Expectations drop, and with them, frustration. You still set boundaries, but without poison in your mind. Epictetus also taught that inner order creates outer strength. Daily reflection, self-examination, and mental rehearsal are not optional. They are training. Without training, philosophy is decoration. Stoicism is not meant to be admired, it's meant to be practiced. Each day you review where you reacted poorly, where you held firm, and where you can improve. Over time, reactions soften, clarity sharpens, and emotional storms lose their intensity. Finally, the Stoic learns to make peace with impermanence. Everything changes: health, youth, power, relationships, even memory. Fighting this truth creates suffering. Accepting it creates calm. When you stop demanding permanence from a temporary world, you stop feeling betrayed by life. You begin to move with it instead of against it. And that is where true invulnerability begins, not in resisting reality, but in aligning with it. When you begin to live this way, something subtle but powerful happens. Your need to explain yourself starts to fade. Most people are constantly justifying their choices, defending their boundaries, and rehearsing arguments in their heads for battles that never even happen. Epictetus warned that the moment you feel compelled to convince others of your worth, you've already surrendered your stability. The Stoic doesn't rush to be understood. They act rightly and let misunderstanding exist without panic. Silence becomes a form of confidence. You stop leaking energy trying to manage other people's perceptions, and that reclaimed energy strengthens your inner posture. Another quiet but transformative Stoic discipline is refusing to personalize randomness. Life is not targeting you. Bad timing, coincidence, and chance events are not moral judgments. Yet the untrained mind interprets every setback as evidence of failure or punishment. Stoicism cuts through this illusion. When something goes wrong, you don't ask, "What does this say about me?" You ask, "What is required of me now?" This shift keeps you from spiraling into self-blame and restores your focus on action instead of rumination. The Stoic also learns to be comfortable standing alone. Epictetus understood that crowds amplify emotion, fear, and foolishness. Most people outsource their thinking to the group because solitude feels threatening. Stoicism trains you to trust your own judgment even when it's unpopular. This doesn't mean arrogance, it means independence. When you no longer need consensus to feel secure, peer pressure loses its grip. You can walk away from unhealthy dynamics, trends, and expectations without feeling like you're missing something essential. There is also a powerful Stoic principle in how you interpret setbacks. Nothing is wasted. Every difficulty refines something: patience, humility, discernment, restraint. The problem only becomes meaningless when you refuse to learn from it. Epictetus believed that adversity reveals your philosophy. Anyone can sound wise when life is smooth. Character shows itself under friction. When hardship arrives, it's not asking whether you approve, it's asking who you are. Another reason Stoicism makes you difficult to disturb is that it removes the illusion of entitlement. Modern thinking often suggests that life owes you happiness, fairness, or comfort. Stoicism strips this expectation away, not to make you bitter, but to make you resilient. When you stop expecting life to be easy, you stop being shocked when it isn't. Gratitude replaces entitlement, and calm replaces outrage. You begin to appreciate peace when it appears instead of demanding it constantly. The Stoic mindset also dissolves the fear of judgment because it clarifies one brutal truth. People are mostly absorbed in themselves. Epictetus knew that much of what we fear, criticism, embarrassment, rejection, exists primarily in our imagination. Others are busy with their own anxieties. When you accept this, you stop shrinking yourself to avoid imagined scrutiny. You speak more honestly, act more boldly, and live less performatively. Another stabilizing idea is learning to distinguish between solitude and loneliness. Stoicism teaches you to be self-sufficient emotionally, not isolated. When you're at peace with your own company, relationships become a choice rather than a dependency. You no longer cling out of fear of emptiness. You connect because you want to, not because you're trying to escape yourself. That inner fullness makes relationships healthier and loss survivable. Epictetus also emphasized that dignity is a daily practice. How you speak, how you endure inconvenience, how you treat others when no reward is visible. These moments shape your inner life. Stoicism isn't dramatic, it's quiet, repetitive, and disciplined, and that's why it works. Over time, you stop reacting loudly to small things because your sense of self no longer feels threatened by them. Eventually, you notice something that others can sense, even if they can't name it. You become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to destabilize, not because you're numb, but because you are anchored. When the world pulls, you don't snap, you hold, and that steadiness changes how life interacts with you. As this steadiness deepens, you start to notice how much of modern stress comes from urgency that isn't real. Everything demands immediate reaction: messages, opinions, outrage, expectations. Epictetus would have seen this as mental slavery. The Stoic refuses false urgency. Not everything deserves a response. Not everything requires your emotional investment. When you slow your reactions, you speed up your clarity. You stop mistaking noise for importance and urgency for truth. Calm decision-making becomes your advantage in a world addicted to panic. Another quiet source of power is learning to sit with discomfort without distraction. Most people immediately reach for stimulation, scrolling, talking, numbing, whenever unease appears. Stoicism teaches you to remain present with discomfort long enough to understand it. Often, what you're avoiding isn't dangerous, it's just unfamiliar. When you stop running from internal tension, it loses its ability to control you. You realize that discomfort passes on its own when you don't feed it with resistance. The Stoic also develops emotional economy. Instead of reacting fully to everything, they reserve intensity for what truly matters. Most people exhaust themselves emotionally before anything meaningful even happens. Epictetus taught that energy is finite. Where you spend it determines your quality of life. When you stop wasting emotional energy on minor frustrations, other people's moods, and imagined scenarios, you suddenly have strength available when real challenges arrive. There is also a deep Stoic wisdom in accepting that progress is uneven. Some days you respond calmly, other days you don't. The mistake is believing one bad reaction erases your discipline. Stoicism is not perfection, it's consistency over time. Epictetus warned against self-condemnation masquerading as self-awareness. When you fail, you observe it, correct it, and move forward without drama. Shame weakens discipline. Clarity strengthens it. Another principle that makes you nearly unshakable is learning to endure boredom. Boredom reveals how dependent the mind has become on stimulation. When you can sit quietly without needing entertainment, validation, or distraction, you regain sovereignty over your attention. Epictetus saw this as a sign of maturity. A mind that can be still is a mind that cannot be easily controlled. As you internalize these ideas, external chaos begins to feel distant, almost irrelevant. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer defines you. Problems still arise, loss still happens, but your identity is no longer fused to outcomes. You experience events without being consumed by them. That separation is not detachment from life, it is engagement without entanglement. Eventually, something profound settles in. You stop asking life to protect you from difficulty, and you start trusting yourself to meet whatever arrives. That trust changes everything. Fear fades because you no longer doubt your capacity to endure. Anxiety weakens because you are no longer negotiating with the future. And the world, sensing your steadiness, begins to push less, or at least, it stops moving you. And this is the quiet truth Epictetus lived by. Nothing can truly affect you unless you grant it access. When your judgments are disciplined, your desires restrained, and your attention guarded, you become internally free, even in a world that is anything but. At this stage, the mind begins to notice a strange reversal. Situations that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable, almost small. Not because they objectively are, but because your inner scale has changed. Epictetus taught that many people live as if every inconvenience is an emergency and every challenge is a verdict on their worth. The Stoic no longer interprets difficulty as danger. A delay becomes neutral, a setback becomes information, an insult becomes background noise. When nothing is exaggerated internally, nothing dominates you externally. You also start to recognize how much suffering is created by resistance. People fight reality constantly, arguing with what already happened, replaying conversations that can't be changed, wishing events had unfolded differently. Stoicism removes this internal friction. It does not mean approval of what happened. It means acceptance of the fact that it did. Energy that was once wasted on protest is redirected into response. This alone frees enormous mental capacity. You stop dragging the past into the present and allow the moment in front of you to be dealt with cleanly. Another shift occurs in how you relate to time. The untrained mind either lives in regret or anticipation, rarely in presence. Epictetus warned that this creates a perpetual state of dissatisfaction. Today is never enough because it's always compared to something else. Stoicism collapses attention back into the now. You deal with what is available, actionable, and real. When your attention stays rooted in the present, anxiety weakens, because anxiety feeds on imagined futures that haven't arrived. You also become less reactive to other people's emotional states. When someone is angry, anxious, dismissive, or dramatic, the old instinct was to mirror it or internalize it. Stoicism interrupts that reflex. You begin to see emotions as weather patterns passing through others, not signals you must obey. This doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you selective. Compassion remains, but absorption disappears. You can care without carrying. Another subtle Stoic discipline is letting go of the need for closure. Many people remain disturbed, not because something happened, but because it didn't end the way they wanted. No apology, no explanation, no resolution. Epictetus would say this is another attempt to control what belongs to others. The Stoic learns to close loops internally. You decide when something is finished, not when the other person finally understands, agrees, or validates you. That self-closure is a profound form of freedom. You also begin to experience fewer emotional spikes because expectations quietly dissolve. Expectations are unspoken contracts with reality that reality never signed. When those contracts are broken, people feel betrayed. Stoicism replaces expectation with preparedness. You don't assume ease, loyalty, fairness, or permanence. You appreciate them when they appear. As expectations lower, peace rises. Life feels less disappointing because you're no longer demanding guarantees from an unpredictable world. At some point, you notice that even fear of loss begins to loosen its grip. Epictetus reminded his students that everything external is on loan. People, possessions, status, even the body itself. When you truly internalize this, clinging becomes unnecessary. You still value things, but you stop panicking at the thought of losing them. Fear shrinks when ownership dissolves. You also stop narrating your life as a tragedy or a triumph. Stoicism neutralizes the story. Events simply occur, and you meet them with reason. This removes the emotional roller coaster created by constant interpretation. Life becomes quieter, not emptier, but steadier. And in that steadiness, clarity grows. Over time, others may notice that you don't react the way you used to. You don't argue as much. You don't explain yourself excessively. You don't escalate tension. This can confuse people who are used to emotional engagement. But Stoicism doesn't seek approval. It seeks alignment. When you are aligned internally, external misunderstanding no longer feels threatening. And slowly, almost without noticing, you stop asking whether something will break you. You already know the answer. At this point, a deeper confidence takes root. Not the loud kind that needs to announce itself, but a quiet certainty that you can handle whatever arrives. Epictetus believed most fear comes from self-doubt, not danger. People are terrified not of events, but of their own imagined weakness in the face of them. As Stoic discipline strengthens, that doubt fades. You no longer ask, "What if this ruins me?" Because experience has shown you that you endure, adapt, and recover. Fear loses its edge when you trust yourself more than circumstances. You also become aware of how rarely things are as personal as they feel. The Stoic mind sees clearly that other people's reactions are shaped by their own histories, wounds, pressures, and misunderstandings. When someone lashes out, withdraws, or disappoints you, it no longer feels like a verdict on your value. It feels like information about their inner state. This understanding prevents unnecessary emotional entanglement. You stop absorbing what was never about you in the first place. Another transformation happens in how you deal with uncertainty. Where most people crave guarantees, Stoicism builds comfort with the unknown. Epictetus taught that demanding certainty in an uncertain world is a recipe for anxiety. The Stoic doesn't need to know how everything will turn out to remain steady. You learn to move forward without full clarity, trusting judgment over prediction. This flexibility makes you more decisive, not less, because you're no longer paralyzed, waiting for perfect conditions. You also stop confusing intensity with importance. Not every strong emotion carries wisdom. Not every urgent thought deserves action. Stoicism sharpens discernment. You feel emotions fully, but you no longer obey them blindly. The gap between impulse and action widens, and in that space, choice becomes possible. This is where dignity lives, choosing your response rather than being dragged by it. As this way of thinking settles in, even silence begins to feel different. Silence no longer feels empty or awkward. It feels grounded. You're not rushing to fill space with words, explanations, or noise. You understand that presence itself communicates strength. Epictetus saw restraint as a form of mastery, the ability to remain composed without needing constant expression. There is also a growing indifference to comparison. Measuring yourself against others fades because it no longer serves you. Their pace, their achievements, their approval, none of it dictates your direction. Stoicism returns your focus inward, where progress is measured by alignment with values rather than external milestones. When comparison dissolves, envy follows. Peace expands. You may also notice that conflict begins to lose its emotional charge. Disagreements no longer feel like threats to identity. You can disagree without hostility, assert boundaries without aggression, and walk away without resentment. This emotional neutrality doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You respond with intention instead of reflex. Over time, even moments of solitude feel fuller. You are no longer trying to escape yourself. Thought becomes a companion rather than an enemy. Reflection replaces rumination. The mind grows quieter, not because there is nothing to think about, but because there is nothing urgent to prove, defend, or resist. And perhaps the most unexpected shift is this: you stop needing life to make sense in order to be at peace. Stoicism doesn't promise fairness or clarity, it promises steadiness. You learn to move forward even when answers are incomplete and outcomes uncertain. That acceptance doesn't weaken you, it anchors you. This is how Stoic invulnerability is built, not through force, denial, or indifference to life, but through disciplined judgment, emotional restraint, and unwavering self-trust. Nothing dramatic changes overnight, yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world loses its power to shake you. As this steadiness becomes your default state, you begin to recognize how much unnecessary suffering comes from mental bargaining. People constantly negotiate with reality. If this happens, I'll be okay. If it doesn't, I won't be. Epictetus saw this as a hidden dependency. The Stoic removes conditions from inner peace. You stop tying your emotional stability to specific outcomes, timelines, or behaviors from others. When peace is no longer conditional, it becomes durable. Life can fluctuate without dragging you with it. You also start to see desire more clearly, not as something to suppress, but something to discipline. Unchecked desire creates restlessness because the mind is always reaching forward, dissatisfied with what is present. Stoicism teaches you to want wisely. When desires align with what is within your control, effort, virtue, restraint, they no longer produce anxiety. When desires chase externals, status, recognition, certainty, they create dependence. As desire becomes more disciplined, contentment becomes more frequent and more stable. Another internal shift occurs in how you process regret. Most people relive past decisions endlessly, punishing themselves for what they didn't know at the time. Epictetus rejected this kind of self-torment. He taught that regret is only useful when it instructs future behavior. Once the lesson is learned, repetition becomes self-harm. The Stoic extracts insight and releases the emotional charge. The past stops bleeding into the present. You also begin to experience a different relationship with effort. Effort is no longer fueled by fear or desperation, but by clarity. You do what needs to be done because it is yours to do, not because you are trying to outrun anxiety or prove worth. This changes the quality of your work, your discipline, and your consistency. Action becomes calmer, more deliberate, and paradoxically, more effective. As your inner world becomes more ordered, external chaos feels less intrusive. You still notice it, but it doesn't dominate your attention. News cycles, opinions, and collective panic lose their hypnotic pull. Epictetus warned that constantly consuming disorder trains the mind to expect disorder. The Stoic limits exposure not out of ignorance, but out of self-respect. You choose what enters your mind with the same care you choose what enters your body. You also start to notice how much strength exists in neutrality, not apathy, but emotional neutrality. When you stop labeling everything as good or bad, success or failure, your reactions soften. Events become data rather than judgments. This neutrality allows quicker recovery because nothing lingers longer than it needs to. You experience life without constantly arguing with it internally. Another profound change is how you relate to endings. Endings no longer feel like collapse. They feel like completion. When something ends, you don't scramble to replace it immediately. You allow space. Epictetus understood that rushing to fill absence is often fear disguised as movement. The Stoic allows transitions to be uncomfortable without panicking. In that space, clarity often appears. Gradually, you realize that emotional strength is not about being unaffected, it's about being unentangled. You still feel loss, disappointment, joy, and relief, but they pass through you rather than defining you. You are present for experience without being imprisoned by it. That distinction changes everything. At some point, life may test this discipline in ways that feel unfair or sudden. And yet, when that moment arrives, there is no collapse, only response. Not because you hardened your heart, but because you trained your judgment. And judgment, Epictetus believed, is the final gatekeeper of freedom. The world continues to move, circumstances continue to shift, but internally something remains steady, something that no longer depends on luck, timing, or approval. And once that steadiness is built, it does not easily leave. Eventually, you notice that even your inner dialogue changes. The voice that once rushed to judge, panic, or dramatize begins to soften. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer sound like commands. Epictetus believed that most people are ruled not by tyrants, but by unexamined thoughts they mistake for truth. As Stoic discipline deepens, you stop treating every thought as an order. You listen, assess, and decide. This alone dismantles much of the anxiety that once felt automatic. You also become more precise about responsibility. Instead of carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you, you learn to set it down. Other people's happiness, choices, healing, or approval are no longer your burden. This doesn't make you careless, it makes you honest. You give what you can without draining yourself trying to control outcomes you never owned. Emotional exhaustion fades when misplaced responsibility is released. Another quiet shift occurs in how you deal with success. Achievement no longer inflates the ego or creates pressure to maintain an image. Epictetus warned that success is just as dangerous as failure when identity becomes attached to it. The Stoic enjoys success without clinging to it, knowing it can change without notice. When success arrives, it's appreciated. When it leaves, nothing essential is lost. This balance prevents both arrogance and despair. You also begin to see patience not as passive waiting, but as active restraint. Patience becomes the ability to endure uncertainty without forcing resolution. In a culture obsessed with immediacy, this restraint feels almost radical. Yet it protects you from impulsive decisions, unnecessary conflict, and self-sabotage. Epictetus viewed patience as a form of wisdom. Knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing when to move. Over time, you notice that your reactions slow, but your awareness sharpens. You're less dramatic, but more observant, less reactive, but more intentional. This combination makes you difficult to provoke and even harder to manipulate. People who rely on emotional hooks find fewer places to attach. Calm becomes your baseline, not because life is calm, but because you are. You may also notice a growing respect for limits, your own and others. Stoicism teaches that limits are not failures, they are realities. When you stop demanding endless energy, endless certainty, endless strength from yourself, self-respect replaces self-criticism. You operate within your capacity instead of constantly pushing past it out of fear. This sustainable strength lasts longer than intensity ever could. Another realization settles in quietly. Peace is not fragile. You once thought it could be shattered by one comment, one loss, one unexpected turn. But now you see that peace, built on reason, is durable. It bends, adjusts, and recovers. It doesn't depend on silence or perfect conditions. It exists even alongside noise and difficulty. You also become more comfortable letting others misunderstand you. Epictetus taught that trying to control interpretation is a losing battle. When you no longer need to be seen a certain way, you move more freely. Your actions speak for themselves, and if they don't convince everyone, that no longer feels urgent. Freedom expands when reputation stops being the primary concern. And somewhere along this path, you stop asking whether Stoicism works. You feel it working in how you sleep, how you speak, how you recover, how you endure. The proof isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's the absence of unnecessary suffering. It's the calm after moments that once would have undone you. The world still tests, life still surprises. But inside, something remains settled, not rigid, not numb, just steady. And that steadiness, once cultivated, becomes a place you can return to, no matter what happens next. As this inner steadiness matures, you start to realize that peace is not something you reach. It's something you stop interfering with. Epictetus understood that the mind naturally settles when it's no longer constantly stirred by judgment, resistance, and craving. Much of what people call stress is self-generated agitation. When you stop demanding that life conform to your preferences, the mind becomes quieter on its own. Calm stops feeling like an achievement and starts feeling like your natural state. You also begin to notice how much emotional pain comes from anticipation rather than experience. People suffer twice, once in imagination and once in reality. Stoicism collapses this duplication. You face events when they arrive, not endlessly beforehand. This doesn't make you careless, it makes you efficient. When a challenge comes, you meet it with full attention. When it's absent, you don't rehearse it unnecessarily. Energy once wasted on dread becomes available for clarity and action. Another refinement occurs in how you experience pleasure. Pleasure becomes cleaner, less desperate. When you're no longer chasing pleasure to escape discomfort, enjoyment becomes deeper and less frantic. Epictetus warned that pleasure sought compulsively becomes another form of slavery. The Stoic enjoys what is present without clinging to it or fearing its end. Joy becomes quieter but more stable. You also stop measuring your days by emotional highs and lows. Instead, you measure them by alignment. Did you act with restraint? Did you respond rather than react? Did you honor what was within your control? This internal metric replaces external validation. Even difficult days can feel successful when you handle them well. This shift creates a sense of quiet pride that doesn't depend on applause. Over time, your tolerance for emotional drama drops, not because you judge it, but because it no longer fits. Chaos feels unnecessary. Excessive reaction feels inefficient. You don't argue as much, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you no longer need to win. You choose clarity over noise, substance over spectacle. That choice simplifies life in ways most people never experience. You may also notice that forgiveness becomes easier, not because others deserve it, but because holding resentment feels pointless. Epictetus saw resentment as a punishment you give yourself for someone else's ignorance. When you truly accept that others act according to their understanding, anger loses its justification. You protect yourself with boundaries, not bitterness. The mind becomes lighter when it stops carrying grudges it doesn't need. Another sign of Stoic strength is how you handle silence after conflict or disappointment. Where there once was rumination, there is now space. You don't replay conversations endlessly or rewrite outcomes in your head. What happened, happened. The lesson is taken. The rest is released. This ability to let moments end is one of the most underrated forms of freedom. As this continues, even identity loosens its grip. You are less invested in labels: strong, weak, successful, failed. You become more interested in practice than identity. Stoicism is lived, not claimed. You don't need to think of yourself as disciplined. You simply act with discipline. You don't need to think of yourself as calm. You simply remain calm. The ego quiets when it no longer needs to narrate. And gradually, something becomes unmistakable. Life feels less hostile. not because it changed, but because you did. Events that once felt like threats now feel like movements you can navigate. The world hasn't softened, but your resistance has. And without resistance, there is far less pain. You continue forward, not armored in rigidity, but grounded in understanding. You are affected by life, but not controlled by it. And that difference, once embodied, reshapes everything that follows. And when all of this settles, when the noise fades and the ideas stop sounding like philosophy and start feeling like experience, you understand what Epictetus was really pointing toward. Not invincibility, not emotional numbness, but freedom. Freedom from being dragged by every thought. Freedom from being shaken by every opinion. Freedom from handing your inner world to people, events, and outcomes that were never meant to own it. The Stoic does not escape pain. They stop being ruled by it. They feel fully, act deliberately, and accept reality without surrendering themselves to it. Nothing about this makes life smaller. It makes it clearer. You still face loss, disappointment, uncertainty, and change, but they no longer feel like threats to your identity. They are simply conditions to navigate. When judgment is disciplined, desire restrained, and attention guarded, nothing external has the authority to break you. The world may pressure you, provoke you, or test you, but it no longer decides who you are or how you stand. That power returns to where it always belonged, within. This is what it means when Stoics say that nothing can affect you, not because nothing happens, but because you no longer collapse when it does. You move through life grounded, deliberate, and awake. Calm not because life is gentle, but because you are trained. And once that steadiness is built, it doesn't vanish at the first sign of difficulty. It stays quiet, firm, unshaken. If this way of thinking strengthened you, even slightly, support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs mental clarity, and subscribing to PsychoVest. This channel exists to help you master the one place where true power lives, your inner world.